Hello everyone. In this video we are going to go ahead and put all of the UVs into one UV map. So I'm going to select on my character, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start to make all the UV shells have I'm going to scale them large so I can easily how do I say this? Match up the checkerboards. So the larger they are, the easier it is to visually see the checkerboard. So I'm going to start by going to my UV shell, and I'm going to highlight all of them. Next thing I'm going to do is just scale them fairly large, give or take, something like that. Okay. And I'm also going to press 5. Okay. So, because I don't need to see my any texture information in here, I'm just going to keep it as is. I was going to press 6 on it, but the square is going to be so tiny that we won't even be able to see it. So, 6. So you'll see how, in comparison, how small that is. So I'm just going to leave it at 5 for now. So, at least just in my UV editor. So from here, what I need to do is I need to match up these squares. Now, we'll start. I'm going to start with the shirt to match into the sleeves. In which case, my tools, move UV shell tool, this needs to be larger. So I'm going to start with the shirt, and I'm going to just scale that up as much as needed. Just drag it off until I get approximately the checkerboard's size I need. Now, most importantly, on this particular seam, I want them to match as close as possible. So, I'm not so concerned of it matching up in the torso and the legs yet. I'm just going to scale this large enough so that at this point they're roughly about the same size. If you can get a spot where you see the squares, you see I'm getting really close, especially on this particular one. And this would be pretty close, but I can probably get it slightly closer, and I'd say that's pretty good. So you'll see that the squares are lining up pretty well, even though they're slightly offset because of the seam. But that's a great start in matching up these checkers. Now again, we can do this for the arms as well. Tools, move UV shell tool, and then the arms, I believe that's the sleeve. These are the arms, and they are. I did scale these approximately. Move UV shell tool. Maybe I can highlight both of them at the same time. There we go. I did scale them approximately to be the same size at the start when I was unwrapping these. So again, this one's not so doesn't need to be as precise, but it's always nice to get it to be pretty precise as possible. And the reason it doesn't need to be as precise is because we're not going to see this seam going into one another. And typically what happens if you have the wrong size, in this case we're just going to call it checkers, what happens in your texture is that you'll see some sort of distortion or pixelation or blurriness in those sections, and it won't look right. So this is a super important part. After unwrapping it, you need to make sure that your scales are all proper. In which case, here, I'm going to say that that's pretty close. Now, moving onward to the hand and fingers. This is an extremely important part to get right. You'll notice that my pinky has much smaller checkers in comparison to the rest of it. These are pretty close. The middle finger and the hand seem pretty good, but we're going to go ahead and adjust these accordingly. So, I'm going to see Tools, Move UV Shell Tool. Okay. And the first thing I'm going to do is scale this part to match the arm, basically. You could probably go ahead, highlight all of these. Oop. Tools, Move UV Shell Tool. Of course, it won't let me do all of them at the same time. And I believe is it this arm? Tools, Move UV Shell Tool. And it's this one. Now, a pretty good way to go about lining this up right off the bat, I'm going to rotate that around, is to literally just kind of scale it, and they should be basically about the same size. The seams won't line up perfectly because they're different, but they're in different spots. But in comparison, that should be about right. And it is. Again, going back up to the fingers here, Move UV Shell. Let's see if I can drag them all. Nope, won't let me drag them all. I'm going to go ahead and have to do these individually. Okay. And now I can scale this one. And roughly what I'm going for is to match it somewhat. I mean, it's not going to be easy to kind of eyeball because the seams are totally different. But it's a good spot to kind of get an idea on scale on matching. I'd say that's pretty close. Okay, now I'll go to this one. And I'll move the thumb out of the way for now. And here, because you have these sections here, you can kind of get a good idea about the size of each one of these should be. It should line up something like that. And it's a little bit, maybe a little bit bigger. In which case, this one is probably goes about here. I'm going to say that's close, at least close enough, maybe a little bit bigger, give or take like that. Alright, so leave this one off to the side, then I'll go to this one, and then once you get one of them down, you can kind of get them all to be about the same size. We know the middle finger is a little bit larger, so just scale it a little bit larger. I'd say that's pretty close. Again, and what I'm doing is I'm just looking in here, matching my checkers to be all approximately the same size. I know this one is slightly larger than the index finger and slightly smaller than the middle finger. So I need to find a little slight happy medium. I always find it easier when they're sort of all have the same angle on them. And maybe just slightly larger. Give it that, to make it slightly larger than the index. I'd say that's a pretty good. And then, last but not least, the pinky. And we already knew that these were far too large for this size, and we know this is smaller than the index or the ring, and smaller than the index ring. It's the smallest finger on here. I'd say give or take, that's pretty good. So you should have your checkers looking pretty close, and you'll notice all the seams are on the bottom, but that's getting the hand to line up. Again, we're going to do this to the other one and move UV shell tool. I'm going to keep them all relatively close to one another here. So thumb, index, middle, ring, and pinky. Alright. And now we'll go over to this hand. And to get started, I'm just going to rotate this one around and drag it slightly over. Grab this hand, bring it down, rotate around, scale, and I'm just basically trying to line it up to approximately the same size as the arm. I'd say that's pretty close. Oop. And now we're going to get into the fingers. Okay. And see if I can highlight them all and drag them down. Nope. And I'll start to bring this one down, and I'm just going to move them all into place really quickly. This is the index. Here's the middle. This should be the ring. The pinky. And the thumb. Alright. Now, I guess I'll start with the thumb here. Just like before, kind of scale it to sort of match these, and once you have one done, you can sort of just scale it to match the other one, so they're pretty close, and they should be pretty close as long as you unwrapped it the same way as I did. And that's basically how I'm going to base these off of. So go ahead over here. And slightly larger. Give or take about there. And this is sort of just my reference point as far as scale goes. This is the middle finger. Give or take about there. Maybe slightly smaller, actually. That's pretty close. We'll go with that. Here. Check this one. Maybe slightly larger. So that's pretty close. And then the pinky. Excuse me. And scale this one down. I just pressed F on my keyboard to zoom in. And you could do this also and get a more precise look. That's pretty close. And then I'm going to go ahead and drag this one over. And then I'm just going to move this one a little bit closer over here. And now I have the checkers. I haven't checked them yet, but they should all relatively look about the same size. I click off my mesh to just check it. I think that's pretty good. Alright, and really, we don't expect all of the checkers to line up and be the same exact size throughout the entire body. But the main part is to make sure that the checkers match at the seams, and then we know our distortions are going to be good. So, I will do the face next. And tool. Oh, let me see if I can just go ahead and drag these. Nope. Tools, move UV shell tool. I actually know that these are the seams, and I'm just going to move these in place of the, to keep the just everything sort of lined up for me to easily tell which part is which, just so I know. Okay. Now I'll do the face. Let's see if I can just do click and drag over these. There we go. And then again, we need to make sure that it actually ties into the neck or into the t-shirt well. I'm going to try scaling these all at the same time. They should all be relatively, that's a little too big. And like I said, we're mostly concerned about it lining up in here. With it being a separate mesh and the face does require a lot of detail, it doesn't need to be exact. In fact, it'd probably be a little bit better if it's a slightly larger because of distortion in the actual UV texture map. But I'd say that's a pretty good size to get going with. I think that'll work. Alright, and now we're going to work our way into the lower part of the body. And I'll put this just offset to the side over here. Tools, move UV shell tool. And basically the legs seem to be pretty good. I would like to be able to, let's see if I can highlight all these. I'd like to be able to do these all at the same time, hopefully. Yep. If not, just like we did with the fingers, you're gonna have to do each one individually. And actually, I'm gonna just slide these off to the side also. And this is the lower half, and now I need to go in here, and I'm gonna check the checkers tying into this point. And basically, just like the arm, if you line this up with the shirt, I'll do it a little bit lower. The checkers should just kind of line up. So if you get it about right, that's about right. That seems like it'll work. And let's see if I can do all these at the same time. And I'm going to see if they're relatively, they seem relatively all the same size checker. And then scale larger. And I'm going to move into place over here just to keep everything sort of lined up. Maybe slightly smaller. Okay. And maybe even slightly smaller than that. I'd say that's pretty good. And then just check to see inside here at the seam. It's not as important because we're not going to see this part, but it is always good to try to line them all up the same. So I'd say that's a pretty good start. And you'll notice as you zoom out, it ties in well here, and then as it moves up, the checkers start to get slightly larger in the arm section, but and sort of angled, if you will. And as long as the checkers start at the seam, line up well there, you're good to go. You're going to have larger checkers in the face and the nose region, especially all in this section. You might have a little bit more distortion, but that's because it's such a smaller UV set, because we just did the entire head all together. Alright, now with that being said, tools, let me see if I can just select my arrow and do UV, and then I'm going to highlight all of the UVs. And what I'm going to try to do is a layout, modify layout. And what that does is it retains all of that information of the proper scale, and it should scale it all directly into there. But you have to make sure that your UV checkerboards all line up before you go ahead and do that. You could try it beforehand. Sometimes in old versions it used to scale it for you. In this one I didn't see it work very well. You'll notice in some spots it could use better spacing, so we'll fix that. But right now I'm enlarging it just to show you that all the checkers will remain the same distortion. Okay, so I'm going to undo it and get it back into place in my UV shell. And then in here, I'm going to turn 5 mode on. 5, 6, or press 6. 6 apparently toggles it on or off. And ideally, you want to get how do I say this? You want to maximize the amount of room you have in this UV shell. So I know this is a pretty good scale to start with. I'm just going to go ahead and show you. If you just leave it like this, that's fine. But if you want to get it a little bit better, and I'm going to press 6 for this so I know the exact size of it, you can manually start to place this in your mesh or in your UV shell, and you can rotate as needed and things like that to get the best possible result. And I'm showing you this because it is important to maximize your volume inside your UV shell. And I like to start with the largest parts first. I always find that to be a great spot to sort of start this process, because it's easier to fit in the smaller pieces than it is to fit in the larger pieces later. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. You're just trying to maximize the amount of room you have. The face is actually one of those things that you can always put on a separate texture map. For this course, we'll just leave it on the same one because it's all one connected UV. That's a pretty good spot for that. The next thing I'm going to do is the shirt shell, if you will, and hopefully I can get a spot that just fits right in here. Maybe I bring this up and get this one a little bit closer to the edges. Okay. And then, now if you can't get the things to fit, you can always rotate, but I got this one to fit just right inside these seams. Okay. And what I'm going to do at the end of this actually is I could probably pull a little bit more of a scale on these so I can get them slightly larger. You need to make sure that it's inside that square. That's pretty good. And the next part, I think I'm going to have to rotate this one like so. Hopefully, I'm trying to squeeze it in this spot. We'll see if it works. Okay, I got it to there. So what I'll do on this one is move this slightly up. And then if I see that I have enough room, what I'm going to do at the end of this is I'm going to basically scale the entire thing and slightly adjust every single UV shell one more time. I'm just trying to get this all to fit first. Maybe I can get this one in over here. And this is just really the proper way to go about doing this. And this one can probably go here. And in comparison to the original layout, our goal with this, again, this is sort of an optional part of this. We're trying to see how much room that we'll have remaining at the end of this, and if it's enough, we're going to scale everything slightly larger and then begin to piece everything together one more time, but with smaller adjustments. And you can see I'm sort of working from smallest to largest in terms of, and I can probably close that off for now. These pieces are always a little tricky because of the shape of them, but I should have a pretty good spot to put them, like right here. And I have a whole bunch of extra room. This is the interior of the mouth, I'm pretty sure. And then I have all this extra space. I think I'll just leave it. I'm happy with the size. It should be fine. But this is just one way to go about doing it. I like to, when possible, put all the hands and fingers and stuff in order when I'm texturing to make it easier for me to recognize, but this will be fine. Move UV shell tool. The original layout is totally acceptable. If you did it that way, no problem. Move UV shell tool. But my aim here is to show you how much extra space is in here. It doesn't seem like a lot because it's such a small region, but it is when it comes to texturing. And it also helps to lay your UVs out in a way that's easier for you to personally texture. And move UV shell tool. And these ones I'll just put right in these little circles here. So this is going to be my unfold and my unwrap. I do have tons of space that I could utilize, but this is good for this project. Like I said, that small extra space that we're seeing here is actually a lot. In professional unwraps and unfolds, there is practically almost no space left once you do this. So what you would normally do is scale everything slightly larger. It's a process, and then make sure it all fits in the square. Anyway, there is my unfold and my placing. I'm going to keep the eyes on a separate material, but once you have it like this inside of this square, you're good to go to begin texturing. So just to show you, everything, once you highlight everything inside that square, everything should be highlighted on your character, and from this point we're ready to begin texturing our character. That's all I have for you in this video on laying out UVs. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, be sure to message me. And stay tuned for the next one.